These are my notes
Nice
right
to see
here.
Tracy. She looks
Oh,
well.
yeah.
I like her.
She's-
I don't have a
She's
memory.
traveling. She
Is
just
she?
went out
I
of
take
town
with the tour, so I don't remember anything.
You know what? I
No,
have to.
today's Monday. She went
Oh.
out this morning. Doesn't get back at the end of the week. She's going to London.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, wow, you really have a long report tonight, too. Well, my report starts at 2:15 of the packet, and I'm like, the rest is all you before that.
Going somewhere.
No, that's
Midwest. Just driving.
Is this going to be a busy period
That's
during
true.
the year?
That's true.
It's just one of those kind of anomalies that just come up. Just like crazy.
Yeah.
She's looking at like,
That would be
Yeah. So does Elaine type all this up?
7 o'clock, guys.
Type all the minutes?
You're ready, Dan? Okay.
Yeah.
Everybody ready? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the May workshop meeting of your Board of Trustees. To honor our nation's heroes and especially to honor the men and women in uniform who serve and protect our community, please rise and join us in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Clerk Horvath, may we have the roll call, please?
Certainly, Madam President. Trustee Hansen.
Here.
Trustee Timick. Here. Trustee Allen.
Here.
Trustee Rudolph.
Here.
Trustee Sifferman.
Here.
Trustee Terrell.
Here.
Thank
All
you.
present.
Thank you. Having read the agenda, does any trustee have an addition or deletion tonight? Hearing none, we'll move on to a presentation of the police pension actuarial overview. Director Turi?
Thank you, Gallagher Trustees. We have Todd Schuler with us from Law Pocket Maintenance, who is the village actuary and actuary collaboration for the village police department for the last several years. And this is here to present the 7-year projection that we asked for as part of the strategic plan to compare the police pension contribution is going to impact the village police.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you for having me out here. I know you guys have a busy agenda, so I'll go through this in a pretty high level. I think you have a copy in your packet. We've got a copy up on the screen as well, so I'll give you a high level of where the results are coming in this year and certainly entertain any questions you have regarding the results. Not only this year's valuation, but what we see on a projected basis going forward. And from a results standpoint, I'll jump right to page 3. And what we're looking at on page 3 is just a numerical version of our projections for the year. One thing to keep in mind when we look at these projections, across the top, we have what we call the budget year or contribution year. So we try to adjust this for when we think the dollars are going to actually go into the pension fund. What that means is the calculations we're doing today are preparing a number that you're going to use this year, not only to make potentially a levy decision, but also a budget decision at the end of the year for contributions that will then go in during fiscal 2020. So the results we're coming up currently, you're going to see in the fiscal 2020 column of this worksheet. If you back up one year in the fiscal 19 column, you're going to see our results from the prior year. We're assuming those are the contributions that are coming in during fiscal 19 as part of this process. If you look at the projections, and I'll just start in the top section there, and those first 3 rows are just a status quo. If everything going forward happens as we anticipated to happen, this is where we see the police pension funding going over the next several years. So if you look in that 2020 column, that gives you an idea of the results we're coming up for in the current year, which is about 1.4 million, 1,440,000 for a recommended contribution this year, again, for fiscal 2020 contributions as they'll go in. That's about an 8.5% increase over the prior year. The primary drivers, 2 things. One, the way these are calculated, they're expected to increase on about 3.5% on an annual basis. So if everything goes perfect, everything goes as expected, this would go up on a 3.5% basis each year. In addition, this year we did have the year ended 12/31/18 was a tough year in the market. So investment returns, at least measured as of 12/31/18, were not as high as the expected rate of return on assets. which caused a bump up in the contribution as well. That impact we are smoothing out over 5 years, and that's a theme you'll see as we look through these projections as part of this process. So if you look at that top row of numbers, you've got the $1,440,000 again under the 2025 column. What you'll see going forward is over the next several budget years, we're looking at an increase of about 6%, 4.5%, 4%, 5.5% as we carry this forward, as opposed to the 3.5% like standard annual increases that we would look for. And that's because the investment results for 12/31/18, we are smoothing over a 5-year period. So we're seeing little pieces of 12/31/18 work our way through these projections. One thing to note that in fiscal 19, and I looked at your first quarter statement already of the assets for fiscal 19. And in the first quarter, your assets are up 10% as of 3/31/2019. It's in the high nines. I call it 9.6% for fiscal 19 already. So there has been a lot of bounce back in the market the first quarter of 19. And we have reflected that in your 19 assets as we run that through that projection. So that some of that has mitigated some of the increase we would expect to see in the next several years, but it hasn't completely mitigated that increase as we progress forward as part of this process. So again, you see increases coming in higher than that 3.5% mark that we would like them to on an annual basis as part of this process, as we work our way and work some of that loss into the next several years of contributions. As we get out to budget 2025, you see that we start to get more around that 3.5%, actually a 3.25% increase going from budget 2024 to 2025, putting us, kind of capping us out around 1.8 million before things then stabilize around that 3.5% increase going forward from that point on the results. One thing I mentioned earlier is the results in 18 were impacted obviously by how the markets worked in 2018. The next couple of sections, what we've done is just give you an idea of the sensitivity of the contributions in the first section. If we do experience other market events that are unfavorable. Some of this is luck based on the snapshot data when we take a snapshot of these assets on an annual basis as of December 31. So if you look at the second section of numbers, the second set of 3 numbers, for example, you'll see that if we get out to, if we average a 3% return on investment each year, and we're expecting a 6 3/4 return on investment each year, as we get out to 2025, we're approaching that $2 million mark for our contribution. So if things don't go as anticipated for an extended period of time, you can see that the contribution will increase even more quickly than what we anticipated in the top section as part of this. One quick important note, just from a caveat standpoint, we're not making a prediction that it's going to be 3% for the next several years. I think it's an important metric to look at from a sensitivity standpoint to get an idea of the impact of market returns in the future on these contributions. We're also not suggesting that 3% is a worst case. Obviously, with the markets, there's a lot of volatility that exists out there. So you never know from year to year. As 2018 reminded us, it's hard to look at a worst case in the markets because they can always go a little bit lower than we expect, even when you look at that. So it's not necessarily a floor. The 1.9 million is not necessarily a cap on how high the contributions could get, depending on how market returns and other things work out. But at least gives you an idea of the sensitivity of these results to these market returns as we progress forward. The last page just has a graphic depiction of the numbers that are on the prior page. So I won't go through that in a lot of detail. But are there any questions about either the current results that we're coming up with or any of the anticipated results as we look forward through this process?
So 3% you're saying is just kind of a random number, that it's not based on what's happened historically averaged out, or?
Correct. What we tried to do, the Society of Actuaries has parameters for looking at benchmarks for certain things. And with investment returns, they like to look at sensitivities that are 3 or 4% above and below. Potentially, if you're looking for like a good case or a or a high-risk case scenario. And what we're generally trying to do is just, when we look at this over an extended period of time, is capture a good chunk of the outcomes. You can never capture every possible outcome unless you're looking at some pretty extreme numbers. So that's where the 3% scenarios come in. Gives you that sensitivity, and I think the numbers that they quote is that if you look at 10-year averages of the S&P 500 over time, that you're generally, if you're going plus or minus 3 to 4% of the average, you're capturing about 70% of the outcomes that could happen. So it doesn't capture the extreme outcomes, but gives you an idea of what could happen in that scenario.
Todd, to build on President Gallagher's comment, did you look at our returns over like kind of the rolling 10-year histories? And what kind of numbers were you seeing? Because I'm seeing numbers like about 5.5%.
Yeah, even, so looking at your rolling 5-year number right now is even a little bit under 4%. And that's for the year ended 12/31/18. So it does include, so right now your 5-year history includes 2015, which was a pretty flat year in the market, and then 2018, which included, I believe it was about a 4.5% loss on the assets for 2018, are included as part of that 5-year history. So you're sitting just under 4% on a rolling 5-year basis.
What's the benchmark? What do we want to aim for?
Benchmark is 6 3/4. We're at 6.75% for an expectation right now on a long-term basis with the market returns.
Well, but isn't there some variability with other downstate pension plans? Not everyone's 6 3/4, and I believe we're
Correct.
at the higher end, still within kind of a range, but that I think the trend has been that communities have been sort of lowering that expected rate of return, right?
Yeah, I would say the last 2 or 3 years, there's been a lot of discussion in the investment community regarding long-term capital market projections. So when they look at domestic equities or international equities and what they think is going to happen in the long term, these capital market projections have been ticking down over the past several years. And it's something that's reported in your financial statements as part of the whole audit process in terms of the long-term expectation by asset class. So there has been discussion, certainly with a lot of folks trying to bring their expected return down. Right now for pension funds, and I'm going to caveat this, pension funds over $10 million simply because you have different investment rules when you're over $10 million than if you're under. For pension funds over $10 million, the bulk of them are going to be in that 6.5% to 7% range. There's a couple that leak above that, a couple that leak below the 6.5 as well, and are doing 6 1/4.
And correct me if I'm wrong, isn't about a third of our assets in U.S. Treasury bonds, like about a 10-year or 5 to 10-year duration that's earning like 2.5% right now?
Yeah, your investment mix, and I'll give you one more caveat. I'm not an investment expert, so there are separate professionals that work with the fund, but the state has certain limitations on how much money you can invest in equities as part of state statute. So they cap equity exposure at 65%. So it sounds about right that a third of the money would be in some sort of fixed income.
Well, I mean, I appreciate your comment about the S&P returns, but we're not getting, I mean, it would be great if we were getting those, but we're not hitting that. And I guess, can I ask you a calculation question on
Yes.
this? Is this assuming we had a goal of 2033 being fully funded? Is this
Correct.
predicated on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Right now, this is still pushing towards the 2033 goal at 100% funding.
Okay, and that's more aggressive than the state requirement, right?
That's correct. State requirement is 90% at 2040.
Okay, and I'm looking over your numbers, I'm actually really surprised by like 2025 between the 3% return and the no return, because I think our assets are a little over 15 million, maybe close to 16 million. 3% on that is over $400,000 a year. And you compound that over 4 or 5 years, it's a couple $1 million. Yet the contribution difference is 16,000 by 2025. And so I'm just surprised that it's not much more significantly steeper. And I guess what I'd like to see with this is what the difference in the asset, how that is growing under these scenarios, not just our contribution, because it just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, we can show you the assets and liabilities that are behind this. Part of it with the asset projection is there's money, so we've got the interest on there and the compounding. There's also dollars moving out for benefit payments and things like that.
Well, those would stay the same, regardless of what our return is, but
Yeah.
if we're short, I mean, this is the concern, if we're short $500,000 from our projection, a 3% difference on $15 million, that just keeps compounding.
Correct.
And I feel that that's a big reason why we're here with a 60% or under 60% funding, is we've been projecting a 6 3/4 and we haven't been hitting it. And over time, that's been hurting us. And I think the other big thing was the actuarial age assumptions. And I think when you guys came in and replaced our previous actuary, we fixed that.
We fixed that, yep.
But that was a big hit as well too. And so longer term, my concern is that if we keep projecting 6 3/4, we don't hit it, that is going to become a very big liability and a very big annual pension contribution.
It's certainly something we could look at, you know, from a sensitivity standpoint. So this year, we're coming up about 1.44 million. If you were to look at a 6.5% expected return, you can add about $110,000 to that from a contribution standpoint. And then that kind of becomes your new normal, looking forward then.
Yeah, but thank you for that. But between 0 and 3%, it's only $16,000. And you just said
And the 16,000 is?
the last year, 1967 versus 1983.
So,
Is that, am I reading that right, or is that?
so our status quo is the 1812 that's above that, the 1.8 million. That's at the very top of.
No, that's fair, but I'm saying is, if you're short 3%, and that's almost $500,000 on 16 million, and you're saying that the impact of being short $500,000 is only 16,000 a year, that surprises me.
Yeah, and part of that is when you're in any given year that you don't hit your expected return, or even when you exceed the expected return. In 2017, there was an excess to the expected return. Those impacts are smoothed out over a 5-year basis. I think that's part of maybe the difference that you're seeing there in terms of how the contribution is calculated, so that we're not just chasing the market up and down on an annual basis. We can show you behind each of these scenarios what the asset and liabilities look like behind them.
Would love it, thank you.
That detail.
Would it make sense to provide also a projection for what pace we'd have to be on to meet the 90% 2040 standard? Because that's technically what state law requires. We're just on a little more aggressive pace to get funded, more fully, more quickly.
I think that's a great idea. I think though, whatever we all decide collectively is a target,
Right.
we would have to stick to it, thick and thin. And that's
You
the
have to.
worry, because, in the example I was running, if it's 3% and it's $500,000 every year, I mean, right now, what is it's like 15, like it's 28 and 50, so we're like 13 million short, I think. And so if we're 13 million short in 2033, that's gonna be pretty challenging to come up with 13 million. But your point's valid, is whatever target we're setting, because what's been happening is they keep changing, we'll have to have it funded by 2030 or 2035 or 2040, and the state keeps moving the goalposts.
And they probably will move it again, honestly. The way things happen. And there's a recapture clause, there's a penalty clause. If we don't levy at least enough to stay with the state's, pace, there is a penalty.
Right.
And we always want to levy at least that, amount, so we're not subject to any recapture.
So what we can do from a minimum standpoint, I know in the report we issue, we put a statutory minimum there so you can see where the current year is at.
differential is,
So if
okay.
you'd like to see that on the projection, we could add a projection with the statutory minimum as well. With that caveat that the legislature could come in at any time, and, we're about 21 years from their 2040 payoff date. And if you look back to as far back as 1980, it's never fallen below 20 years from a statutory standpoint. So, that's where we sit currently.
The 20 years in the future.
Correct. As soon as they.
But if you start in 1980, 20 years in the future just keeps rolling.
Well, so in 1980, it was a 40-year payoff period, and then 13 years later, it got down to 27. They extended it back out to 30.
State makes adjustments,
Yeah.
on like a
That got down to-
20-year horizon.
That got down to 22, I think, and we extended it back out to 30 again. So it tends to not get below 20 before they take action.
But just for our residents, we are on a very aggressive pace. And,
Correct.
And it is a challenge for us, but it's a worthy goal to try to attain. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Moving on, we now open the meeting up to the public. If anyone would like to address the board, now is your opportunity during our citizen comment period. Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the consideration of the agenda items. We've switched the order up a little bit so that General Government Committee can go first with the Tollway Intergovernmental Agreement. Trustee Tim.
Thank you, President Gallagher. Do you want to actually cover that item first?
No, I think.
Go through everything else first? Okay, which is great. Okay. So actually, the first three items on the agenda under general government are intertwined, and they relate to a request from the Business Association, WISBA, to renew their annual liquor license. And this is something we did last year for the first time, which was, instead of having them come back with multiple requests for the different events that they host throughout the year, we granted them an annual liquor license, and they are asking that that be renewed for this year. And we did review this during the General Government Committee, and we do believe that this would be appropriate. WISBA's done a great job of running the events. Everything's run pretty smoothly. The draft documents were in the packet for the temporary use permit, the license agreement, and the Class J ordinance. Really no significant changes to the events other than the Gathering on the Green and the Fall Festival will move from Friday to Saturday to allow them to get more of a full day out of it, hopefully drum up more attendance and get, more involved with the village and the residents. So, as I said, general government reviewed it. We found it to be acceptable, and our proposal would be to put this on the omnibus.
Okay, any questions on that? We'll put it on the omnibus. Thank you.
Great, okay. The next one also was covered at the General Government Committee, and that was a request from Director Schramm, who heads up our technology department. And basically, the request was to enter into an agreement with Comcast Business to provide backup internet connectivity for the village. Director Schramm explained how critical this is now because so much of our communications within the village are carried over the internet, and if we were to lose that service, as we actually did once in the not too recent past, and if it were for an extended period of time, it would become a real problem. So he investigated and found that Comcast Business could provide the connection that we would need, and there was a draft of that agreement as well in the packet, and this was budgeted. It's about $1,000 a month for 3 years, or about $12.3 thousand annually. And again, general government reviewed this and found this to be a wise move, so we can put that on the omnibus.
Absolutely, yeah, I think that's minimum dollars to pay for that security, so, thank you. We'll put on the omnibus.
Okay, and then the next one also was covered at the last general government meeting, and that basically is Illinois law regarding open meetings requires that we review on an annual basis our closed meeting minutes and determine if the content was appropriate and some of it was suitable for release. There was a list of meetings that were highlighted as the ones we would look to make available. We did review that list and the draft resolution and found that this seemed acceptable as well, so we would look to put that on the omnibus.
Okay, yeah, are there any questions on that? We have to approve that at open meetings, so if you've had a chance to review, and I know the committee has reviewed it, so
Absolutely.
we'll add it.
And the recommendation for keeping certain portions of those minutes closed is based on what we, typically do is we keep confidential those items that deal with personnel, labor, and litigation due to strategy and, making sure we don't undermine the village's leverage in any negotiating matters. So that's the only portions of those minutes that are recommended for remaining confidential.
Great.
Thank you. We'll put that on the omnibus too.
Excellent. And then the last one on the list is actually the status of the Tollway Intergovernmental Agreement, and I'm actually going to hand it off to Village Manager Velkman to take it from here.
Thank you, Trustee Timmick. Tonight, the General Government Committee brings before you the intergovernmental agreement between the Village of Western Springs and the Illinois Tollway. We also have some Tollway representatives here tonight that will be able to answer questions later on after the presentation. As you know, this is a $4 billion project. It impacts the entire western border of the Village of Western Springs. It spans the I-294 expressway from Balmoral Avenue to 95th Street. It has some very aggressive and monumental engineering task ahead of them on removing 2 oases, the reconstruction of the mile-long bridge, the reconfiguration of the I-290, 294 interchange, the removal and the reconstruction of the Burlington Northern Bridge, and also the removal of the pedestrian overpass. These are just several of the items that they are doing here. So I think before we even start that, it would be helpful if we view a video that was prepared by the tollway. And also, it is goes very quickly, but if you can't, if you want to see it again, it's on the tollway website, and also hopefully our audience, that they see that too. So, are you going to start it? Yes. And this is the reconstruction of the BNSF bridge. So you see the Shoofly Bridge being put up. This third track, the second track, the first track. So you have all the tracks at once. Down the old bridge, you can see, and they widen so they can accommodate the 14 lanes. They build the new bridge, and they will take down the Shoofly except for the one track. If it could only be that easy. Yes. So, before any work on the main line can begin, on the I-294 construction, the tollway does need to remove that bridge. So, as you can see from, well, there's some information up here that you can take a look at. And there is an addition of the Shoofly Bridge, and then once they complete that, the third track will remain. There is a ramp that will go up to the third track where they have some equipment that they can store on a temporary basis. And they have asked that the railroad also, that they put, there'll be a sign here and ask them to park their vehicles as much as possible over the tollway, so it is not in our view. So, first work will be done on the south side, on the Shoofly, and that'll be in the Spring Rock Park area. Once that is done, the existing rail bridge will be removed, and the road will be widened to accommodate the 14 lanes. The BNSF intends to keep one of the tracks for the storage, as we know, and then there will be also a pedestrian bridge at Maple Street. Well, that's all the way up here, and that is the one that is being taken down. The Village of Hinsdale and the Village of Western Springs still need to discuss the pedestrian bridge, whether or not it's going to go by the 47th Street Bridge, and that'll have to also involve the Park District at that time, but that is something that is still coming down the track, so as you can say. Just so you know that Ogden Avenue, 47th Street, and the 55th Street bridges will remain. The Plainfield Road Bridge will be rebuilt, but it will remain open to traffic, so that is a good thing for us. Mm-hmm. The proposed intergovernmental agreement it's a legally binding agreement. It's a document that strives not only to protect us, but also the tollway. And the focus of it is mainly on the BNSF right now, because that is the first work that is to be done. The design work on the main line still is yet to be completed, so we'll probably see more information coming on that in the future. With regard to land acquisition, the tollway requires land currently owned by the village for the construction of the project. There's a parcel up in the area by the bridge, by the pedestrian bridge right now. As you can see, there's also a parcel here by the Public Works area that is what they would like to, I think that's a permanent easement. Then there are some temporary easements and also some permanent easements along the rail here. And also down here by the commuter parking that we have. Also in the Commonwealth area, there is a strip of land that they would like to acquire also. Possibly some drainage area in that area too. So that is the, and these exhibits are in your packet so that you can take a closer look. We talked about the pedestrian bridge, or the pedestrian underpass across Prospect Avenue will improve the safety of the rail crossing. The work will be done during the reconstruction of the railroad bridge, and the tollway provided the design support for the new pedestrian underpass. This included the Phase 1 and the Phase 2 engineering. We have secured additional funding for the rest of the construction, and we will be the lead on the project. I also spoke today with the ICC to confirm that we do have the $900,000 earmarked, and there is a process that they have, but we are also going to receive that funding, so we will be fine with the funding on that. Well number 4, and yeah, better picture. As you know, well number 4 is right down here in this area, and the tollway is working with the village to monitor and protect the well to ensure the structural integrity and the water quality, and also to provide backup power while the project work occurs. We have a very extensive construction, vibration, and displacement monitoring language in the IGA. Also, groundwater protection needs assessments are going to be required, water quality testing, and then we will also be doing a televised inspection of the buildings in the area to monitor the buildings, the structure of it. Because once they start putting in the pylons here, there's going to be a lot of noise. So hopefully everyone understands that. And a lot of vibration. Landscaping, fencing, and site screens will be developed in partnership with the village and the tollway. And that will be at the end of the project, but just so you know, this area will be clear cut, just like on the other side also, as you saw in the video, it'll be clear cut in order for them to put it in, but they will be restoring it afterwards. So we are looking for some long-term screening here so that you can't see it from the park. So, and the Park District has been working with them also on that too. The village also identified a drainage problem right here underneath the BNSF embankment, and they are installing a new 48-inch pipe under the BNSF rail line for the village. With this addresses local flooding concerns, and it is also going to be one that will be maintained by the village once it is completed. This also helps Spring Park in this area also. But we will be also looking to obtain an easement from the Park District for this the storm sewer, so that will be coming in the next year or so. During the construction, we will lose approximately 75 commuter parking spots. Upon the completion of the construction, sidewalks and other amenities will be included in the project to improve access from the commuter parking to the train station, and that is in lieu of the money that we will be using for the parking permits and so forth. So, and that amount, in order to build those sidewalks, is much more than that.
But it's just in the area of Spring Rock Park
Yes.
and everything. It is not sidewalks in the village or
No,
anything.
no.
Don't want anybody thinking
And
that.
also, we are working right now, Director Turi and DC Albrecht are working with the pool in order to use some of the spots during their off months and so forth. So they are in negotiations right now. Let's see, have noise abatement walls erected. New ones will be put in throughout the village. And there are areas where really did not meet the criteria of your abatement policy, so, but we know that they are highly sensitive areas, and so especially down by the Public Works area, that impacts the recreation center and these residents back here, so we will be putting in more walls than is justified, so according to their policy. And that also is true for down by the Oasis also, where we'll have some additional noise walls too.
But Springmark Park is going to remain a berm.
That is according to what the Park District has asked.
So we had that meeting, and there was a number of villagers who came from over where I live, and so the walls will be going up.
Yes.
That they were very concerned about.
Yes, yes, in the north area. And I think there's some additional noise walls over there in that area, correct, next to Ogden Avenue there? Like up to that in the ramp there.
Where will they be, the walls?
I don't have you for that, but we've got the map online, it shows exactly where the walls are planned. We do extend them around the ramp a little bit, then we extend it to the south.
By Timber Trails, yeah.
He needs to go to the mic.
Security of the village, this is something that I know that Trustee Sifferman has been very adamant about, and thank you very much for that. It is of the utmost concern for us, the tollway, and also the construction companies too. So, no construction vehicles will be entering from the village. They will be entering from the tollway, because otherwise our streets will suffer from that, and we simply don't want those types of trucks coming in and out and so forth. And it's for the security and the safety of everyone. So, if they do need some type of access, then they will make sure that they will notify us first so that we know that it's coming through. With regard to, there will be some aerial cameras installed to monitor the site, and the maintenance staff will be monitoring the roadway. In addition, we have 2 police, state police cars that will be dedicated to the construction on 94. And this is included in the agreement. And if the tollway acquires the south terminus at Commonwealth Avenue, once the project is completed, then we can complete the cul-de-sac there at the very end, and then I believe we would also receive the land there. It would be our responsibility, it would be transferred to us. Construction hours, I think that's everyone's concern also, and we've had a couple blips already with some trucks being out there way too early, and I know that the tollway has been very good about following up on that and making sure that they understand our requirements. And we do have established hours within the village that they need to follow. There will be times where they will be working 24/7 on the main line, and that's not within our jurisdiction, so they will be working on that. They will be closing the tollway at times also. We have some special events that come about in the village throughout the year, so we have asked that they not work during those, too much construction in that time frame. The agreement also addresses fiber optics, utilities, signage, detention design, maintenance responsibilities, and also customer service. We also have asked that in the agreement we have that there is a customer service point of contact for us, and also that they keep us advised constantly on our website and their website as to the status of the construction. As you can see, it's a very lengthy document. This is just an overview, and I'm going to ask Attorney Jarusik to provide some of his legal comments also.
Thank you.
Yeah, briefly, and if anybody has any follow-up questions when we're done, feel free to ask. I will say the document that's in your packet is really a collaborative document, a real example of a lot of significant effort from both village staff, village consultants, tollway staff, tollway consultants. It has significant enhancements over the original templated tollway agreement we got back in end of December, January. Under the engineering section of this agreement, what's significant in my view is that the village has a review and comment right, and there's a process for us to review all tollway project plans, not the entire, $4 billion project, but the project plans that are germane to our community and that impact us, property that's either in our town or adjacent to our town. Ingrid touched upon many of the items, but let me just drill down on a couple. Stormwater drainage facilities that they're going to be installing on our western border or just inside our western border. We are going to have an opportunity to not only review those plans and have comment, but they've made a commitment that no construction will reduce the capacity or operation of our stormwater drainage facilities. And we do have some facilities such as Timber Trails has a significant stormwater drainage facility on its western edge. We will have an opportunity to review and provide comment on their detention basin landscape maintenance plans. They're going to have an enhanced plan not only to take care of grass and landscaping, but debris, litter, and also invasive weed removal. Why that's important is these open stormwater drainage basins, if you allow debris and some of that invasive weeds to grow, it impacts drainage capacity and the operational functioning of the system. East Side Oasis, they've made a commitment to work with us to allow us to see site development plan, have comments on that, to also implement a debris and litter cleanup, program over there. They've also made a commitment to work with the village to attempt to address the parking lot light reduction, issues, site aesthetic concerns, exhaust regulations for the vendors over there that, might be cooking food or producing exhaust or odors. They're also making a commitment to endeavor to provide additional truck parking within the corridor, that being the whole tollway, to help address, the truck noise and exhaust that we have currently there, because it's, the Oasis really doubles as an overnight and a sort of a short-term trucker parking hotel, if you will. So it would be good to get that component of the Oasis moved somewhere else where it's not near a residential area. They've made a commitment to allow us to look at their other mainline plans that are going to be adjacent to us, again, to have comment. I think that's important. To the extent that there are any other plans impact current zoning provisions, such as a conditional use or a plan unit development, that would be Commonwealth, that would be Timber Trails. They've agreed to go through the process of seeking an amendment to the extent their plans require that, and we will cooperate with them in doing that. With respect to right-of-way acquisition, we currently have appraisals underway to get a dollar amount. The tollway isn't going to be paying us a dollar amount. We have essentially exchanged like-kind value for whatever that dollar amount will be in regard to this overall project. And so they're going to be constructing certain public improvements within their project within the village's boundaries that will be provided to the village at no cost. That's going to be in exchange for either providing them with fee simple title, actually deeding them land, or providing them with temporary or permanent easements within which to build those public infrastructure. Some of that infrastructure they will own. Some of that infrastructure, such as the drainage items that Ingrid and other Jeff has talked about in prior meetings, that'll be owned and maintained by the village. The cul-de-sac, Ingrid, touched upon that. If they do acquire that property at the south end of Commonwealth, they will build a cul-de-sac. They'll deed it to us. They'll turn the property over. The village actually owns a portion of that land that would be utilized for the cul-de-sac. Part of that land south of the current road is the dedicated part of Commonwealth Avenue that was never paved. So part of that Commonwealth property will be Commonwealth Drive, Commonwealth Avenue will be used to round out that cul-de-sac. They're going to handle noise complaints. Ingrid mentioned there's going to be a customer service phone and an email system. They're going to, commit to handle noise complaints. They've committed to enhance security measures. They've committed to not interfere with certain annual village and community events, including a theater event, park district events that are identified in the document. I'm glad to report that a groundwater protection needs assessment was already done for well number 4. We've seen it. It has no major concerns with respect to their operations vis-a-vis the park, or vis-a-vis the well. But that is not a guarantee, that an accident could happen. So, this agreement is bolstered, from the standpoint of making sure, construction vibration, displacement monitoring, water quality testing is all part of the protections that have been built in for the village. Ingrid mentioned television inspection. We're going to have a baseline for knowing kind of the condition of the buildings that are in close, proximity to the project, and we'll have an idea if there's any damage to those through the course of the project or after the project due to the vibration and the pounding of, certain infrastructure that's going in the ground. We're going to have a construction protocol and emergency communication plan. Why that's critical is, if something goes wrong out there, there's going to be a standard operating procedure for who to call, who to dial in. We're going to have a backup water supply identified, and that will be, triggered. If there has to be a backup water supply due to any impact on well number 4, the tollway has committed in this agreement to pay for that backup water supply until well number 4 gets built and reconstructed. They will pay for any damage to the well, if any. But it is on village. We have to identify this, the supplemental water supply and take steps to, engage that, and that is something staff will work on. They're going to pay for any damage to existing infrastructure beyond the well. That's really it. They've committed to maintenance responsibilities post-project. The Oasis currently has, they talk about the garbage hill on the backside that faces east. They've committed to, implementing a maintenance plan, for all their properties adjacent to us or within our borders to do a better job of maintaining them. So those are some of the enhancements that weren't present back in January when we first saw the agreement, and I think it's a much, much better document, and it's due to cooperative efforts that we've had out of their staff and consultants.
Thank you. Thank you for those overviews. Appreciate it. Does anybody have any questions? We also have representatives from the tollway here to address any questions you may have.
Is there anything in the document about dispute resolution if something comes up?
There is actually a dispute resolution provision specifically to address that, any type of dispute.
How does that work? Is there a third
It's a
party mediator?
it's a negotiation, and if it doesn't get resolved, it would turn into a legal dispute. But the goal is to have it, resolved through a negotiated process.
I have a question related to the cameras that are addressed in this. The question as far as where those will be monitored and how often they will be monitored, or is it just something that's going to be recorded, and in the event something happens, you'll go back and look at it? Is there going to be any live or regular coverage and review of those videos?
To my knowledge, I believe they are going to just record them, and they're not going to have them live or have somebody watch them, but maybe Rocco, you can.
Yeah, so there'll be, the cameras that we'll have on site.
Rocco, I'm sorry, you
Oh, I'm
have to
sorry.
come up. I'm sorry. This is so the folks at home can hear you.
Good evening, Rocco Zucchero with the Illinois Tollway. Regarding the cameras, yeah, they'll be static cameras. They'll be just basically recorded of what's happening on the site. We don't anticipate having anybody monitor the cameras. We do have full camera coverage of our roadway, but we supplement that camera coverage with on-site or
Well, where does it go?
Safety.
Where is there a service?
Safety,
Is it,
yeah, it's an off-site service, third-party service that would provide the camera coverage service and feeds for us.
okay, all right.
But more than likely, there'll be somebody present almost 24 hours
Yeah,
a
there'll be
day
24/7
within our
presence
village.
along, yeah, and we've added additional state police forces we outlined in the memo that was provided.
And you said there's an emergency tree calling that something happened.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll have an emergency protocol plan for the entire project, whatever happens, people are responsible 24/7 throughout the day, so as things are happening. There's a phone tree, basically is what we have, we outline that, we'll be coordinating with your emergency responders, police and fire here local, with our state police, with our maintenance people who are out 24/7 on the road. They've already been identified, and make sure they're up and down patrol corridors. We're looking, not just on the local side, we're also monitoring what's happening on our side of the road, making sure that any breakdowns or people, anything that's happening, we're taking care of those safety issues as well.
And what is your anticipated start date for the shoe fly? I know Burlington Northern is doing that, but
We'll call it midsummer, sometime in August. is the
This year?
anticipated start- This year.
yes. What? So I know that the Park District is hoping that their tennis courts can be available through the middle of August. How realistic or reasonable is that?
We're working on that timeline
Okay.
to see when our project might start, to see what flexibility we have.
Okay.
We've got the dates in the term, I think 12th, 13th, 14th. Park District needs to do some work. After the term is over, they need 2 weeks to get out there and rubblize or basically break up the pavement that on the tennis courts. They plan on reusing that, the parking lot. So there's a coordinated operation that we'll be working on.
Okay, thank you.
Matt, when's the latest estimate for well number 5 to be up?
Well, number 5.
Yeah, the well number 5 project was always targeted to be completed by the end
So I guess my concern is that they're going to be starting on the rail line with that pounding, and if well number 4 goes down, we will not, there's 4 or 5 months there that we would not have well number 5 up, right? So I guess, they talked about backup water supply will be provided, but it wasn't clear to me what that is, because we're going to be in a lot of trouble if well 4 goes down and well 5 is not up. And it seems to me, it goes a little bit to what Trustee Terrell said. It said the impacts would be damages, to maybe to the structure itself, but that's going to have a lot of incidental damage to the village if we have to go back to well number 1. So I guess I'm just kind of concerned. Have we also done the video? It talked about a video testing of the integrity of well number 4, and it sounded like that hasn't been completed yet. So I'm just concerned, like, do we know how structurally sound that whole well number 4 is today going into this project?
Sure. So I'll try to unpack.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions there.
So the first component of that, yes, we were aware through these negotiations for some of the timing, and we tried to incorporate that into the IGA when we worked for that provision. So those emergency connections that Attorney Jerusalem referenced are our connections to LaGrange and LaGrange Highlands. We have 2 connections that are supplemental that could feed the village if we had needed them.
Those are like a couple days though, right? That's what they're intended for?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of would depend on the specific scenario of what goes down. A lot of that is also dependent on the seasonality of when things go on. Typically during the fall and winter months, we don't even need to operate 2 wells simultaneously. It's really in those summer months when we have, just because of system demand. To the question regarding the televising, no, we have not done televising of the actual well itself. I don't recall off the top of my head if that was language in the idea or not. We have talked with our consultants, Baxter Lindeman and Lynn Christensen, about the integrity of the well. All of that kind of got included as part of the discussions, as part of the GPNA, the groundwater protection needs assessment. And we can kind of address some of those issues.
No, I think, but when we last did the refurbishment of well number 4, like a dozen years or so, or 10 years ago?
It was about 2010.
2010, did we notice anything at that point? Did we do a visual inspection, or did we just?
No, we typically don't do a visual inspection of the well. I mean, so you have the well pipe, that all gets removed, and whatever needs to get replaced is replaced as part of that. The outside of that is essentially, so a certain several hundred feet of that is encased in concrete. I don't know off the top of my head exactly how deep that is. And then below that, you're basically in bedrock. Once you're getting several hundred feet to several thousand feet down, it is solid bedrock down in that area, so you don't have that concrete encasement. But you do have the well pipe that does extend all the way down. That's what gets inspected when we do our maintenance.
Thank you. Well, I guess the last part of the tail question was maybe for Attorney Drusik, because, or the dispute resolution. If well number, and let's hope it doesn't, but if well number 4 is damaged, the impact could be greater than just the cost to repair well number 4. And so my read of the IGA is we're not entitled to those type of auxiliary damages. Is that correct or incorrect? Or-
Our version of the document, you are. The version they gave us last Friday to make the board package, you're not. But I have identified that that's not, that language is going, it had to be reviewed. That is not what we're recommending. We're recommending that they are responsible. We have to go back to my original language, which is they are responsible for any damage and any, resulting, contingent damage that's caused to our infrastructure.
Okay.
Yep.
And then I had several other comments that I sent,
Yep.
But we'll get those.
Before we get off that, though,
Yeah.
I mean, the timing is unfortunate, but we're waiting on the final approval from the IEPA loan, so, we had hoped to
For
be.
well number 5, right?
For well number 5, so we had hoped to be further along in the process, but, the timing is what it is,
Well,
so.
understood, and I think the biggest risk is just before we have well number 5 up, because that could be
Right.
it could be a good bit.
Understood.
The other thing is the drainage improvement, and I think, Matt, you talked about that GPNA. Like, Flat Creek has really bad drainage, and it seemed vague as to what exactly the tollway is committing to doing there. I just didn't know if it sounded like the study hadn't been completed yet, and then there was some talk about maybe they're gonna do some more expansion along the oasis, and that could be maybe even further impervious surface, and so it's not clear to me what's, even in addition to the widening of the roads, what actually is included in these calculations and how they're actually going to improve drainage all along the southern part of our village along Flat Creek.
So I'll comment a little bit, and then for the GPNA portion of it, that's focused solely on the protection around the well, so that doesn't cover stormwater issues. That was designed as a study really to focus on what sort of activities from the construction could impact the well, whether it's some sort of runoff or hazardous chemicals or some sort of physical impact. Around the well in the public works yard, there is a stormwater improvement specifically that we're trying to address in cooperation with the tollway. They have a stormwater culvert that runs under the tollway and kind of ends or intersects in the southwest corner of the public works garage. Kind of in cooperation with them to improve some of the stormwater runoff over there, we're working on stormwater pipe to go under the BNSF. There's also, we've had some conversations, and this is where I'll kind of defer, in the other portions where they have to do some stormwater capture to get some detention. And that ties into some of the other work that they're doing regarding to their impervious service areas, and then also some of the acquisitions and some of the other improvements outside the core corridor itself.
Yeah, again, so on detention or stormwater management, we're doing a few different things, and again, we're working on mostly on the main line still. We should have our plans wrapped up sometime this fall on detention. But as a general rule of thumb, and we can't introduce any additional drainage into any area, so any additional impervious pavement that we put down, we have to detain handle all that additional stormwater. We are doing it a couple different ways. We are buying some additional land, as I mentioned, for open detention systems, so dry basins. They'll have water in it when it rains, and it will dissipate. We are also doing some of our detention in pipes throughout the project. So overall, there's no additional water that will be entering into Flat Creek. We have to accommodate any additional surface that we put down within our drainage design criteria. That's just pretty much the way the laws are written. We comply.
Thank you. That sounded to me like it'll be status quo, like it will be where it is today, it won't be worse. I guess I'm asking, can it be better? And I guess with that, what are you contemplating for possible expansion along the Oasis in terms of other buildings up there besides the gas station?
Sure, and absolutely, we're trying to do all we can to make it, and from a detention standpoint, make it better. Land is honestly hard to come by. Where there's any opportunities, that's what we're trying to do. I think one of the stormwater improvements that you'll see here, specifically in town, is that 48-inch pipe. I mean, that was something that was called out to us I've complimented the staff a couple years ago when we first started this, that was a major drainage problem. So that's one thing that will definitely be fixed for the Public Works facility to the south through Spring Rock Park. So those are things that we're doing above and beyond just our standards. So there are things, but that's more of a, that's a true local benefit. From the Oasis, we truly have no plans. There's nothing thought of, designed through there, so there's nothing to share. And that is, like did say, that we do have plans, we'll be sharing those for your review. See, so I can't even speak to what that might be.
Yeah, fair. I mean, that's unknown, right, I guess, at this point, but, okay. Well, I mean, let me say it a little bit differently. Are you designing some extra capacity in there for potential future expansion or potential future impervious surface along that Oasis area?
Are we totally designing anything from a drainage standpoint?
Correct.
No, because we have no idea what that would even entail. What we do try to do, though, as a general philosophy, slow the water down, capture the water before it gets in. So there's things that we're doing on the other side of the highway to capture water coming from the west side to the east through Flag Creek. So there's other drainage improvements that are happening throughout. We look at things as a watershed basis. So it's not what you just do on this site. What can you do upstream to make sure that the water is captured before it gets here? So there are additional improvements that are happening just by virtue of land on the other side. There's a lot of other properties that are being acquired to capture the west side drainage, so before it enters into the creek. So not much specific here, and step back to where water goes, doesn't have any boundaries besides where it wants.
Thank you.
Any other questions of Rachel?
I'm just thinking, Jeff, did you want me to maybe comment on the stormwater sewer also?
Well, early on, we identified a lot of the drainage problems within the village, everything that was along the western border of the village. And that included an area up by Maple Street. There's a large berm that goes along the back of those homes back inside there historically. It's been a drainage problem for us. It just doesn't have a lot of good drainage. In addition to that, we had this area by Public Works, and that area is basically constrained by the Coal Road's current system. And so we asked them to put in this extended new system, which will allow us to drain a greater area. It'll allow us to do more separation. One of the things that we have historically also is a lot of problems with combined sewer overflows. That's part of our NPDES permit, which is the National Discharge Elimination System. These things go into much more complex issues, but the benefits that the tollway has brought to us are pretty significant in terms of benefiting the village, in terms of getting us. We're actually going to get, if you want to call them like points, to some certain extent of NPDES reduction in combined sewer overflows from the IEPA. In addition, one of the things that you didn't see in all of these diagrams is there's other properties that the tollway is acquiring that are on the Western Spring side, but also on the Hinsdale side, as Rocco had indicated. And those additional properties are really where a lot of this stormwater is going to be stored. And when they talk about, we're not allowing any more stormwater to come in, what they're talking about is a rate. I mean, obviously it creates more stormwater. Anytime you build an impervious surface like or a house or anything like that, you're going to create more water. The key there is to hold that water back so that they don't create any flooding. So they store it and they release it at a small diameter pipe release rate. That there in fact protects the streams and all of our conveyance systems that the village currently enjoys. So that's happening down at Timber Trails, some property down at Timber Trails, some of what we call the Hartz properties down at the Commonwealth. also another property that we call the Hook property, which is behind the, what we used to be the Vaughn's Garden Center, and now we have a little
Bright Horizons.
veterinary clinic or something like that, Bright Horizons right now. So they've acquired some property behind there. So they've actively been pursuing these properties to reduce their impact on the village's storm sewer systems and conveyance systems is really what this is all about. So I commend them for taking the approach that they have. We identified it early, and they've taken that under advisement, and so far it's been pretty, from an engineering standpoint, they've been very proactive about it.
Jeff, what will those MPDES points do for us?
Basically, there is a goal through the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. The goal is to eliminate combined sewer overflows, ultimately. And what for instance, this 48-inch storm sewer that always going to construct underneath Public Works will allow the village to further separate its sewer. So stripping off the stormwater out of the combined sewer systems will then cause less overflows because we have less water going into our combined sewer system. And so when I call it points, it's just the ultimate goal is to eliminate those. And eventually you're going to have to, the village is going to have to separate the vast majority of the sewers in order to eliminate them. We have we're familiar with the Tunnel and Reservoir Project, which is the TARP system on the north half, which is the deep tunnel. So that part really doesn't impact this. We have a section of Old Town Northwest that actually drains into this area that we've been doing some separation over the years. But we've kind of been halted in some of that because of the sewer depth related issue, which the tollway has taken on as part of that. Ultimately, those type of improvements are going to benefit us from the standpoint of reducing our combined sewer overflows and eventually eliminating those combined sewer overflows. So it's just part of a larger, one of these unfunded mandate type of things where you're required to start cleaning up the environment, and that starts with stopping these combined sewer overflows, which is basically it's raw sewage combined with a lot of stormwater, so it's very diluted, and it gets actually discharged through the receiving stream, and this is going to help significantly.
Which is a good goal to have, I think.
It's
So,
a great goal.
yeah. Any other questions?
I had a quick question of Director Super. What these backup water supply, or the in case well number 4 goes down and 5's not up, what would that be? We trucking in water, or?
No, so we have physical pipe connections, emergency connections to two of our neighbors,
Okay.
LaGrange and LaGrange Highlands. And as such, it's emergency connection their way as well. So if they were ever in need of water, we can open up those emergency connections to supply both connections.
And that'd be able to take care of a heavy rush time in August, for example?
By itself, no. It would be a supplemental sort of system for us.
Okay.
The assumption we would go into some sort of watering ban and other things like that, right?
Exactly. It is for kind of a true emergency system.
Just to follow up on Trustee Allen's question on that, in terms of what is the length of support we would be able to count on?
We've never had to utilize those, so we don't have any real-world data really to base that on. Both of those connections are 12-inch feed mains. Our transmission mains that we use throughout the town to distribute throughout the community are 12-inch mains. So there's a large volume of water you could do that. Really, it would kind of depend a lot on how their system's operating at that particular time. So it is a very, for lack of a pun, I guess, fluid sort of situation, which we have to kind of assess on how we can handle that. It would have to act, I think, as a supplemental. We would still have our other well is operating during that period, but it wouldn't be meant to directly provide water to our entire district.
Can we test those connections?
We do exercise them on an annual basis, so we know they work. We just haven't had a situation where we were depressurized or lack of water, and actually we're bringing in test actually demand. So we operate those valves on a daily basis, we coordinate with both of those organizations when we do those exercising. We just haven't depressurized the subdivision to then feed it with supplemental water.
Okay.
But that water, would that water have to go through the reverse osmosis plant then?
No, it's already treated, it's directly connected to our distribution system.
Oh, okay.
But it'd be like Michigan.
It would be Lake Michigan water, and there's plenty of that, isn't
Both
there?
of those connections are, both LaGrange Highlands and LaGrange are Lake Michigan.
Right. And so they feasibly, I mean, they might have plenty of water, correct? Other than their allocation, like,
Well, I mean, they have pump stations which bring certain quantities of water to them. Those pump stations have capacity similar to our water treatment plant output capacity.
and is this something that we would have to pay them for?
Ultimately, yes, because they pay for their water.
Right, that's what I'm thinking.
The tollway would pay for it.
The tollway.
We just established that, right?
Okay.
But that's some of the provisions that Attorney Drusik can.
Okay.
But that's not a long-term solution. We wouldn't be able to
Right.
just bring that in
No,
because there would
that's
be so
em-
many more problems. So it would be on an emergency
That's an
basis
emergency,
if we had
yeah.
to do it.
Yes.
Okay. One other timing question. What about the pedestrian underpass? What's the timing with that? In terms,
I'm going to defer to Jeff.
So today, Trustee Rudolph, I received 30% plans from the consultant who's preparing the underpass plans. I just reviewed them actually tonight while I was listening to everything else that was going on, and we'll provide them comments tomorrow. So we are forging ahead to try and get this project done while the work is still being done on the BNSF program, the tracks, to try and gain some benefit, although it's doubtful because of the track, what they call track windows, and things like that need to be opened up to do certain aspects of the construction. And whether those sequence of operations coincide is something that's yet to be determined.
Okay.
A lot of it depends on the work that the Northern does, the Tollway does, and when our plans and stuff. But we've got a pretty aggressive schedule right now.
Okay.
Like I said, we're already at 30%. It's only been a few months. I think the greatest challenge for us is to get reviews in a timely fashion from BNSF. They're a big organization. I do know that they're outsourcing all of the reviews right now because they don't have enough staff. And so we're working through some challenges on that right now. We've already made a 10% submittal. We're now at 30% submittal. And so we'll continue to push forward on this and get it done as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay.
So that was the last item on my report. The last thing I was going to add is I'd like to commend the village staff and Attorney Drusik and the village support staff for getting this agreement, well, and the Tollway Authority as well too, to getting this agreement this far, this quickly, without rushing it. I think with what we've heard today, we've seen that the village is well protected and in good shape here. So I think a lot of hard work went into that, and those folks should be recognized for that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And with that, that concludes my report.
Just a procedural, is this then on the omnibus in 2 weeks?
That is the goal, yes.
And is that the new board or the current board?
Current
Current
board.
board. That was the
board.
idea to try to get it on for May. Yeah.
And did the general government get a chance to see any other villages, IGAs?
Yes.
While you deliberated on it?
So it's been, the Hinsdale agreement's been provided to us. And then we also had the benefit of Rocco and some other representation from the Tollway Authority at our last general government meeting as well.
Thank you. Mr. Zucchero, thank you for coming. Appreciate the comments.
Oh, thank you. Do appreciate it. It's been good.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to our Public Works and Water Committee, Trustee Allen.
Oh, thank you, President Gallagher. Item A, capital summary. Briefly, several of the projects are IEPA related. Of course, the well number 5, standpipe and Clausen water main. We're waiting on final loan approval before we can really commence and sign contracts for that. One other thing I wanted to touch on, and feel free if you have questions, is this is our last year of the televising of the storm sewers. So that's a 5-year thing that has now been complete, or will be completed by the end of the year throughout the village. And as I mentioned previously, we get to go to, instead of having to do 1/5 of the village each year, we get to go to high priority areas in the future, which makes economic sense, but also from like a risk standpoint, I think that's actually a fairly reasonable outcome for that. So if there are no questions on other capital summary items, I'll move to the new capital outlook report, or CORE. It's on page 92 of your document. This really came out of the strategic planning process. It's a 5-year sort of look at kind of all-inclusive capital projects going forward. It's somewhere between an annual budget process and the long-term control plan. The long-term control plan and the annual budget are required documents to prepare, but the long-term control plan really looks at things that are necessary but maybe not funded yet. So a good example are separating storm water and also sanitary sewers throughout primarily Old Town, which is it's a good project, but it's incredibly expensive, over $20 million. So it just hasn't really been funded yet. In the capital outlook report, it gives some guidelines on how we should really be looking at things, all inclusive, to include engineering costs as 2% CPI factor when we're thinking about projects that are maybe extend more than a year or a year out, or things like a road referendum. I think this will help alleviate some of the issues we saw with the 2016 road referendum. It is marked draft. We did review it at our committee. We did have a couple comments coming out of it. One of these is new, and it's actually going to feed into the next one, about the general purpose reserve. Is not currently in the CORE. I think it would be a good addition in there because it ties into numbers. Well, first of all, did anyone have any comments about the CORE? I guess from my view, I think it's going to be a great document for people to kind of get an idea of what's coming down the pipe for the village. I view it as sort of a bit of a living document that might need to be kind of periodically just refreshed, but I think it'll give people a good overview, maybe new trustees, things like that, and gives you an idea from a budgeting finance standpoint of sort of what kind of projects are coming down the road, so you can think about when you're looking at more current things, how that might be impacted on the village fisc down the road. So if you have any questions.
Yes, I do.
Go, please. Go.
So thank you for this. This is a very comprehensive and excellent document. Appreciate all your work on this, and it's a great template going forward. Even though it's 5-year, it's a 5-year projection. Is the idea to review and amend it annually, or?
That would be the intent is.
Okay.
This is, through our conversations with the Infrastructure Commission and the Public Works and Water Committee, to kind of, as we move forward through the budget process, have this be as a complementary document, we'll say, to the annual budget. So we would update this on an annual basis, probably in the winter, early spring, sometime along there.
Okay.
Once the budget's finalized, we kind of then update the document, stuff in here. The goal, I think, from the Public Works and Water Committee was to try to make something that's a little more digestible. You know, the annual budget has all of the information, the exact same information in there, but it's a very large document.
Mm-hmm.
For some people in the community who are very concerned or very conscientious about some infrastructure projects, road, water, sewer, and so forth, we were trying to create a document that's a little bit more accessible for them to kind of jump in, find what they needed, then jump back out.
Wonderful. Thank you again. Appreciate it.
I echo President Gallagher's comments. I thought you and your team did a really nice job putting that together. I think it's going to be very helpful going forward. Item C, Central Avenue. This is a project that is a large project, at least from a cost standpoint, and it's Central Avenue from Burlington to 47th Street. And I think the timing's interesting because it is something, as you see, there's a memo from Director Supert in our packet starting on page 110 that we are going to get some grant money. Now, this, if you look at the PCI report, Central Avenue, that's the road condition report, isn't on the top of the list. It's actually a reasonably good road condition-wise, but underneath it, it has that combined stormwater sanitary sewer, which is less than ideal. That in and of itself is less than ideal, but then it also creates some flooding on the other side of 47th, I think at Fair Elms, if I'm not mistaken, that has been historically a problem. So I think the idea from staff was that because of the significant amount of grant money, even though this project combined road construction and sewer is over $4 million, that we'd get a very high percentage of it paid for through grant money. Now, our share of it is also over $1 million. It's not something that was contemplated when we did the capital raise for the road referendum in 2016, and we just don't have that sitting around in petty cash. So one idea for funding on that would be for the to be used off of the general purpose reserve, which, as you may recall, using the general purpose reserve to fund projects that require a cost match was always one of the intents for that fund. We discussed this at committee, but there were some open questions, so we did not take action at that time. So it's out there. Like I said, I think this is well, it is a major project. You can sort of see the value of having some funding to alleviate that number, and it does at least make a dent in the very larger project of trying to separate stormwater and sanitary, albeit just a small couple blocks in this example. Moving on, number D, the 2019 sidewalk and curb replacement, that's page 137.
Sorry, just
yeah, please go.
You, the last time you said there were some questions and so no action was taken. Were those questions resolved or what?
I'm sorry. Yeah, that's a good point. So in his memo, Director Supert's memo, one of the main questions was on the engineering and what the how that was, what was actually being requested. Is it phase 1 and phase 2 or just phase 1? And where would that money for the engineering costs come from? It seemingly is going to be something that we do need to move on relatively quickly. I think my understanding on that, and Director Super can jump in, is that even though the memo says the request was for phase 1 and phase 2 at the same time engineering, which I think totaled about $300,000 going off memory, that really the point that they're looking for approval at some point in the near future would be phase 1 at this time. Is that right, Matt?
Yeah, so actually, we are looking to actually get the phase 1 approved this month. Because we're on a bit of a time crunch, as I noted a little bit in the memo, the project has been on hold for a couple of years as we've been dealing with some some of the other funding issues, primarily the sewer component. Just a few months ago, we received about $750,000 from the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District to do the sewer separation part. The sewer separation part is actually identified in that capital outlook report that we referenced earlier. It's basically the southern basin of Old Town South to help separate that. You have to put that part of it in place first as the backbone, so to speak, before we can do separation in the rest of that area as part of our long-term control plan. So the road grants that the village received, we have approximately $2 million in road funds that we received by Central Municipal Conference. That money has to be spent in 2020. The engineering lead time that we are looking at on this project is approximately 8 months of engineering or so. So we really would like, from a staff perspective, to get the phase 1 moving so we can continue with engineering through this year so the project can be ready to go in 2020. What Trustee Allen was referring to before, I had a bit confusion on my part as to when we were going to get the different engineering proposals. We have in the packet tonight the phase 1 engineering. The goal is to get the phase 2 engineering to bring to the board in June, possibly July. Jeff, any other clarifications on the engineering? Or did I?
No, that's pretty much.
So to carry on with Trustee Timmick's question, because it's a good one, I guess my personal concern, and just speaking for myself and not for the committee, was I didn't know if Finance had a chance to review this and figure out if they're approving whatever budget amendments would be needed and the draw on the general purpose reserve. And so that's why we weren't planning to take any action until we got some sort of validation on that as well too. But you know, if that can get resolved before the omnibus, that's one thing. But if not, I would recommend it go to June until it can, just to make sure that financially it makes sense from that standpoint.
So Grace, were you planning to try to get a finance committee meeting for the 20th or? No. Okay.
So your recommendation then is to hold it until June?
Well, that's my, so it came out of committee without any approval or any, there was no action taken. And so now I'm just speaking personally for myself, is I would like to make sure that, all things are aligned on this, that these numbers in this memo are all inclusive, that it's construction, that it's engineering, et cetera, et cetera. That, that it is the draw on the general purpose reserve, that there wasn't other encumbrance intended for that fund as well too. That's my own personal recommendation. The board can choose how they want to if it does come to a vote.
Well, perhaps we can get some of these, or get the committee's questions answered prior to May 20th.
Yeah, we did have a conversation last week. I think we had most of the questions answered. I think there's a little bit of funding confusion that we might want to clear. So the phase one, we do have the funding in the budget for this year. The part that we would need to do the budget amendment for would be the phase two.
But phase two is also this year though,
That's
too.
true. That is true.
But
Yeah.
we would have till June, it sounds like, to do that, is what you were suggesting for phase two?
June or July.
June or July, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
But the bigger question is, my number, $1.5 million, is our share of it roughly. Is that something that is contemplated in our numbers? Because it was kind of a long-term thing, and then the grant came through, and now it's something that has been moved up. It got accelerated from a road condition situation. This is where underground is now driving what's above ground.
Right.
Typically, we try to go the other direction. So that throws a little bit of that, makes that a little bit flexible, if you will. It did not go through the Infrastructure Commission either, as well.
That's true, but that is an area that does flood consistently with storms, both south of 47th as well as through Old Town South.
Yes, correct, and that I think would alleviate, or at least reduce some of that situation or improve it. So, yeah, I mean, that is the benefit of the project.
You're correct about the road, but I think sometimes what's underneath has to drive these projects as well,
Absolutely, it's all funding, right?
Right.
It's all, does it come from here, does it come from here, and because it's all priorities of, but yes, you're right, that is, there is a benefit to the village for this project, I don't think there was a question about that.
And this is the one too, a major consideration would be the impact on Spring Rock Park, just during construction.
Correct, and it's
it would
right,
be huge,
it's right
just
in
from
that
a,
area with the
from a
with the
logistics.
tollway and so forth, so, yes, and we did not explore, that's a good point also, we did not explore that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, good comments.
Ingrid, did you have something?
Just, I'm thinking maybe staff can go back, we can take a look at the funding and then also logistics as to when, with construction and so forth, and maybe come back with a recommendation to the board, so.
Thank you. Item D is the 2019 sidewalk and curb replacement. This is a routine annual recurrence. You can see that there was a bid process for this. The low bidder was Strata. Previously, we've been using Schroeder and Schroeder, and staff and we concurred are recommending Strata for this year for the sidewalk and curb replacement. We did have a discussion on this, and to place this on the omnibus, just to finish my thought, that similar to what we're trying to do with the roads is to look at, are we spending the right amount of money, either too much or too little, to keep up with the condition of the sidewalks and their sort of repair schedule. So, these get, there's different types of sidewalk repairs. Some are aesthetic, and that moves more to the homeowners. Some are tripping hazards. Things like that, and staff tries to do sections of town at a time within the budget money that that are allocated for this. And one of the things we looked at was maybe how many complaints we get, or how many we're actually doing, to sort of see if we're kind of meeting that curve of how sidewalks deteriorate versus how much we're spending on annual maintenance for them. So in any event, we are recommending, the committee discussed this, and we are recommending approval of Strata for the 2019 sidewalk and curb replacement. Next item E is 2019 smoke testing. As you may recall, this is the one that we previously got bids. Staff recommended and we concurred to reject all bids and discuss a new bidding with a more limited scope. We discussed this in committee and recommended awarding RJN Group. Just to give you a little bit of background, there's actually a good map in our packet. This is all south of 47th Street, and this would be the high priority areas that came up under the televising scoping that has been done. You can see the smoke testing is a little bit under what our budget for this was, which I believe was $25,000, correct me if I'm wrong, which would allow for some future dye testing as well too, just to pinpoint if we see any issues with the smoke testing to make sure we know exactly where the illicit or illegal connection is. As we discussed before, this is something we would need to communicate to residents in advance so that they are prepared if they do see smoke coming into their house. It may be a connection from a previous owner, but the cost of repair would have to be borne by the homeowner on this, and they would be given some amount of time, but not an unlimited amount of time to effect that repair. Okay. The last one is item F, Baxter and Woodman IEPA loan amendment agreements. We are recommending that these move to the omnibus. They may look a little bit familiar to you, but these are phase 3 engineering. It does get kind of confusing because they're phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and then the loan application itself. And so it seems to be a lot of invoice or agreements, separate agreements going to Baxter and Woodman, but they are all planned, and this is consistent with what we were expecting. And if you did not have any questions on that or anything else I've said, this would conclude my report for the calendar.
Thank you, Trustee Allen. All right, we'll put those items that the committee does recommend on the omnibus then.
Thank you.
Thank you. Properties and Rec Committee, Trustee Hansen.
Thank you, President Gallagher. The first item on the report is on page 215 of our packets is the capital summary report. First item is the door for the historic water tower. The staff is reviewing the final request for proposal language and specifications with the village architect, and this RFP is expected to go out to publication this month with the hope that the work will occur in July or August. Next item is the East Train platform. The punch list items for the East Train platform is almost completed. The last few items are weather dependent, and as soon as we have some good weather, hopefully that will all be completed. And the third item on the capital summary report is the Wolf Road bike path. Phase 1 engineering is almost complete. The village did receive the comments back from IDOT on the Phase 1 plans, and after reviewing IDOT's comments, the engineering plans were resubmitted to IDOT in mid-April. So now we're waiting to hear back from them on that resubmission, and we have not yet complete, correct, Matt? We haven't heard back.
I can answer that. So
Oh.
I did a quick update of this project today.
Oh.
So IDOT answered, came back with some answers to we actually responded to those April comments. They came back with a few more things that they want us to address. One is a crash analysis, based upon the fact that the bike path actually crosses one of their higher volume roadways. They're going to require us to do a crash analysis. We were originally told by the state that that was not going to be required, but they came back and wanted that today. And then, actually it was early last week. And then traffic, we haven't gotten comments back from traffic. We are currently waiting for Cook County Department of Transportation Highways traffic comments, Department of Transportation Highways drainage, and tree mitigation. Ultimately, those are the remaining items.
Okay, I was just gonna say, we still have not heard from them about the tree mitigation cost. So it looks like that Wolf Road bike path is probably a 2020 project completion.
At this point, yes, I would say it's probably.
Okay. And then the next item in the packet on page 221 and beyond is the proposal for the design of the C-Spire sensory room that is going into Grand Avenue Community Center. The current understanding with C-Spire is that the village will pay the cost of the design, and C-Spire will pay the construction cost and furnishings. Once we receive the estimated construction cost from 845 Design Group, we will create a formal IGA between Western Springs and C-SPAR. In our packets is the agreement that C-SPAR has with the Village of Lisle, just as an example. C-SPAR is looking into grants to fund their portion of this project, but we are recommending the approval of the proposal from 845 Design Group for the design of the C-SPAR room in the amount of $10,335. So that would go to the omnibus.
Okay.
And then the last item was about the Spring Rock tennis courts, and as we stated earlier, it's unclear that they will be available through August, but it's hopeful, so.
Okay.
Thank you, and that concludes my report.
Thank you, trustee Hanson. Did you have a
Yeah,
comment?
I just had one question. On that East Train platform, did staff have a chance to look at the 2019 budget for that? It just seemed different than what I remember from the 2018 budget. The total number of 3.9 something million between the federal and the village grant.
You're talking for the,
East
was
Train
it budgeted
platform?
for 2019 as a remainder or the total project cost?
Well, both, really. How much do we still need to spend? Trustee Hanson mentioned the punch list items, and how does that compare to what, in aggregate, what we thought?
Yeah, so Finance Department and my department will be doing some conversations to kind of figure out where we end up in the total. I presume some of that information or some capacity we brought for the Finance Committee at some point. Grace and I talked earlier today, and actually a little bit last week, I think. There is some money, it was kind of a rollover from last year, about $150,000 in mine improvements in the BNSF fund that was in the budget last year that we rolled forward. Where we are at the total, I don't have a good answer at this point, exactly what that total number is going to look up for the project cost. We'll have to work through some of those.
Okay, but we think the 150 rollover will be sufficient for
The punch
what
list.
is needed?
For the
Yeah.
punch list items.
Yes, I believe so.
The expenditures listed in capitalized are not the entire cost of the project. The entire cost of the project is split 80/20. State of Illinois, IDOT picks up the 80%. So we never see that proportion. So anything that gets reported for us is 20%. And the lag between the state billing us and what's on the, what we report. Okay, 9 months, exactly 2 years before we see final invoices.
Oh.
So right now, we've got an amount reported at the end of 18, but we haven't seen anything for 2019 yet.
Okay, well, I mean, fair, I mean, so there's that lag issue, but we approved, I think, last year, a 25,000 amendment for the workday issue, and I just didn't know if there was.
That's, those, I mean, flaggers?
Yeah.
Yes.
Those are paid,
Okay.
but the actual construction cost is for the IDOT lag. recognized.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I did want to mention too, the revised capital summary reports are also a big improvement, very comprehensive, and it gives all of us a good snapshot of these projects as they move along.
They are still a work in progress. They are getting quite better, yes.
Yeah, they're great. Thank you. Okay, turning to the Finance Committee, trustee Rudolph.
Thank you, President Gallagher. Just a quick update on the police pension fund. The pension board met last week on April 30th and met with the fund advisor there. And the main takeaway is that the investment policy as a whole was discussed, and amendments to the policy have been forwarded to legal for review. Just as a matter of course and review, they were last reviewed and updated about 3 years ago, so this is just a normal course to take a look at those. And those, the revised investment policy will be presented then at the July meeting, is what we are expecting. And with that, nothing further.
Oh, thank you.
How about that?
That's wonderful. Thank you. Turning to Public Health and Safety Committee, trustee Sifferman.
Thank you, President Gallagher. The Public Health and Safety Committee met earlier this evening, and there are a number of issues to report on. First of all, we're advancing a resolution. You'll find a draft resolution in your packets that would approve and authorize an agreement between the Village of Western Springs and Municipal Services Incorporated for computer software that aids and assists in the administration of our administrative hearing system that we have in place. It's viewed as a very cost-saving measure that will improve our ability to manage these cases. And we're asking that that be added to the omnibus bill for the next meeting.
Thank you, we'll do that.
A number of other items appear in your packets. First of all, there's a flyer that announces another in a series of Chat with the Chief that will be conducted Thursday, May 16th at the Starbucks on 47th Street, where Chief Buds will appear for informal gatherings and opportunities for the public to engage him in a conversation about things that matter to them and the police department. And it's a great opportunity. Already feedback from earlier sessions with the chief have proved beneficial, and we encourage all of our residents who are interested in sharing some comments and perspectives with the chief to appear. And we understand that complimentary coffee will be served at this event. Another item that is worth mentioning and emphasizing is Chief Budd's idea for his inaugural Youth Citizens Police Academy that is being planned for the week of July 22nd through the 26th, sponsored by the Western Springs Police Department. And in this day and age, when the public's understanding and appreciation for law enforcement services is in need, we believe, of a concerted effort to improve those understanding and appreciation. We're reaching out to youth, and this is a great opportunity, a great springboard to involve youth from the 7th and 8th grade area of their educational process to participate in this event. There are some requirements to participate that are listed in this bulletin, and this will be published and placed on the website. This is a great opportunity, and we'll keep a very watchful eye. It's a very exciting opportunity that the police department will enjoy benefits as well as the public as well. And there are two proclamations, President Gallagher, that we're asking that you mention here this evening, and that is identifying National Police Week proclamation and the Emergency Medical Services Week proclamation that we're asking you to read into the record here this evening.
I'll be happy to read those. Thank you, Trustee Sifferman. The first proclamation is the National Police Week, a proclamation to recognize this week and honor the service and sacrifice of those law enforcement officers killed in the line of duty while protecting our community and safeguarding our democracy. Whereas there are more than 900,000 law enforcement officers serving in communities across the United States, including the dedicated members of the Western Springs Police Department. Whereas there have been 60,211 assaults against law enforcement officers in 2017, resulting in approximately 17,476 injuries. Whereas since the first recorded death in 1786, more than 21,000 law enforcement officers in the United States have made the ultimate sacrifice and been killed in the line of duty. Whereas the names of 21,910 dedicated public servants are engraved on the walls of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial in Washington, D.C. Whereas 371 new names of fallen heroes are being added to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial this spring, including 158 officers killed in 2018 and 213 officers killed in previous years. Whereas the service and sacrifice of all officers killed in the line of duty will be honored during the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund's annual Candlelight Vigil in Washington, D.C. on the evening of May 13, 2019. Whereas the Candlelight Vigil is part of National Police Week, which takes place this year on May 12th through May 18th. Whereas May 15th is designated as Peace Officers Memorial Day in honor of all fallen officers and their families, and U.S. flags should be flown at half-staff. Therefore, be it resolved that the Village of Western Springs formally designates May 12th to 18th, 2019 as Police Week in Western Springs and publicly salutes the service of law enforcement officers in our community and in communities across the nation. Those are some sobering statistics. The second proclamation is the Emergency Medical Services Week proclamation. Whereas emergency medical services is a vital public service, and whereas the members of emergency medical services teams are ready to provide life-saving care to those in need 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And whereas access to quality emergency care dramatically improves the survival and recovery rate of those who experience sudden illness or injury. And whereas the emergency medical services system consists of emergency physicians, emergency nurses, emergency medical technicians, paramedics, firefighters, educators, administrators, and others. And whereas the members of emergency medical services teams, whether career or volunteer, engage in thousands of hours of specialized training and continuing education to enhance their life-saving skills. And whereas it is appropriate to recognize the value and the accomplishments of emergency medical services providers by designating Emergency Medical Services Week. Now therefore be it resolved that the Village of Western Springs proclaims the week of May 19th to 25th, 2019 as Emergency Medical Services Week. We encourage the community to observe this week and commend the devotion, contributions, and services of members of emergency medical services teams. And so I think the chief said that approximately 80% of our calls are EMS calls.
That's correct, President Gallagher.
So this proclamation is very important to Western Springs. Thank you. It's been an honor to read those. Trustee Sippin.
And also, Chief Kenny has advanced for our edification here this evening a couple of other items. First of all, there was an incident in which EMS responded to a situation in a household where two youngsters helped save the life of their mother. And by the time that EMS services reached the scene and could continue those life-saving measures, they learned of this, and there's a request for the recognition of these two youngsters at a future meeting. And we think it's very important to shed some light on the importance of this life-saving technique and to advance notice that of this heroic effort that was extended by two members of this person's family. That'll be at one of our upcoming meetings. Another item Chief Kenny reports is his attendance at an April 13th demonstration and presentation at the Hinsdale Fire Department in conjunction with the DuPage County Health Department, where the pilot program for the community to train the community on the use of Narcan. We reported in an earlier meeting the opioid epidemic that is addressed and stopped in its tracks from what we've seen with the application of Narcan. And Chief Kenny couldn't say enough about how heartwarming this was, where over 100 people gathered, representing all age groups, including members of families that were affected by this tragedy, as well as others learning more about the use of this device and its availability for purchase without a prescription at local drugstores that is capable of being administered with some small directions in the event that a person is discovered with having these effects of opioid abuse. we're interested in continuing our close cooperation with this program and advancing this in the future. The last item that I'd like to report on is recognition of a most comprehensive and valuable report on the 2018 annual report of the Western Springs Department of Fire and Emergency Services. Nearly 1,200 incidents were responded to in 2018, with the majority of those, as already mentioned, for emergency medical services complaints and requests for service, with an additional over 300 responses to assist in other communities. Chief Kenny identified several highlights in this report, including the extensive recruiting efforts undertaken in this past year, the succession planning and HR transition challenges that were addressed, the overriding issue of improving and reviewing the policy and procedures that are in place, and adjusting language and improving the language in that, improving the insurance service organization rating for our village because of the improved services of fire and emergency medical services. Also addressed were performance appraisals of all staff in this past year, and the development of fire engine specifications that we're going to have to consider in upcoming budgets to replace a fire engine that is no longer and will no longer be of use to the standards that we would expect. Chief, is there anything else that you would like to highlight in this report? It's a very, very comprehensive and really reflects the missions that you've clearly identified in your report.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You did a great job in summarizing, and it's a late meeting, so I'm not going to go. I think the one thing I would share with you is, first of all, I thank firefighter Rick Zach. Rick has done and been the shepherd of this report for the last few years. He's moving on because professionally he has a chance to do that. So part of succession planning was train somebody to do the annual report for next year, so that's been taken care of. But he really did an awful lot of work on this. Second part is, and I have on purpose, kind of downplayed the ISO 2 rating. When we had our annual meeting this year in January, and we go over our goals for the 2019 year, the motto was raise the bar. And I threw that out to everybody because I said it's great to be an ISO 2, but we can raise the bar even a little bit higher in terms of performance. And I'm incredibly proud that the performances that you see highlighted in this report, none of them do I get any credit for. It's the people who are part of our staff, neighbors protecting neighbors, that do the yeoman's weight of this work and continue to do it. And I couldn't be more proud to be associated with them. Your support for them has been incredibly appreciated by them. We've seen you at all sorts of events that we've had, including we've had a number of retirements as well as swearing in. So we've had a lot of positive and a good job by people stepping up for succession planning, and we look forward to doing that, continuing to hold that bar really high in 2019. So thank you for the support. I speak for all our members of our department, and thank you to those in the community that are watching. We feel the love that's given to our members, and we try to give that back. So thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chief. This concludes my report.
Thank you, Trustee Sipperman. Chief, it's truly remarkable and admirable what your paid-on-call model department accomplishes every year. And so, on behalf of the board, we are certainly proud to support you and your department, and appreciate all your service for our community.
Thank you.
Moving on to Planning and Zoning Committee, Trustee Terrell.
Thank you, President Gallagher. Fortunately for all of us here and anyone who is still watching at home, I just have one small housekeeping matter. We heard a little bit earlier today about the combined sewer or overflow pipes. There is one right now which is running north-south on just west of Fair Elms. It's running through 2 vacant lots. Those vacant lots are being developed, and discovered that we need to have a permanent easement to attach to the property. So that has been drafted up, as well as a plat. The owners have agreed to the permanent easement, and I believe this is an omnibus matter. Is that right, Marty? It's just a simple omnibus matter in 2 weeks. And other than that, that's all I would have.
Okay. If there's no questions, we'll put that on the omnibus. Thank you.
Thank
Any other business tonight? No. Moving on to reports then. My report. On April 24th, I attended the West Central Municipal Council and, let's see if I get this right, West Cook County Solid Waste Association membership meetings at Brookfield Zoo. For the WCMC meeting, the membership approved the annual budget, which did include a 6-cent per capita increase in municipal dues. On April 25th, I attended the RTA press conference to support RTA's request for sustainable funding in the proposed state capital budget. We heard many compelling commentary from professionals in business, education, and government, among others, regarding the dire state of transit funding, its infrastructure, and the need for investment. Of course, when it came to how those were going to be funded, then it got a little quiet, but that's always the case. But I think that does need to be addressed. On April 30th, Director Scott, Director Supert, and Assistant Director Biernacki and I met with 2 Forest Hills residents who are interested in restructuring our sidewalk policy. They are engaged in seeing sidewalks installed throughout Forest Hills, and the issues they raised will be reviewed by legal and the Infrastructure Commission at a future date and for further review. Finally, on May 3rd, thank you to all of those who attended our retirement celebration in honor of our 3 trustees, Barry Allen, Sheila Hansen, and Ed Timick, along with 2 trustees each from the Parks and Library Boards. It was a fun evening with Senator John Curran attending, and Jim Tyrrell and Bill Sifferman did a superb job roasting our outgoing trustees. I do want you to know how much we appreciate your service, and we all have learned so much from you, as I'm sure you've heard over the past month. We will miss you all very much. I just want to say a special thank you, though, to Elaine Haskey for all of her work in making the evening such a special event. And that concludes my report, Village Manager Velpe.
Thank you, President Gallagher. I just wanted to tell you that we have to cancel the May 9th orientation for the new trustees due to some work conflicts. We are working on some new dates, hopefully before the 20th of May, but if not, we'll have to have it afterwards. So, and those who are going off the board, if you would like to join us, I will make sure that you receive an invitation. So.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Is that it?
That is all. Thank you.
Thank you. Village Attorney Jerusik?
Just a quick note, I did send around an email to everybody. The recreational cannabis legislation is back on the table. I shared an executive summary that was produced by the state with you. The bill is 500 pages long. It's substantially what I summarized for the West Central or the West Cook Chamber. That PowerPoint, and I think I shared that with everybody. So there are some differences. I'll bring back some of the tweaks that they have made to the legislation, and I will give you options for complying with it. We'll have time. The act, if it goes into effect, will not go into effect until January 1, 2020. So there is some time to digest it and also plan for it. There seems to be an opt-out provision similar to Cook County minimum wage, which is interesting.
Second.
And there are also some of the distance restrictions that were in the prior version aren't there, which means it may be easier for dispensaries to open up in communities. The tie to distance from residential districts has been omitted for the generic regular cannabis dispensary, that distance restriction or separation vis-à-vis medical marijuana dispensaries is still in place. So the windup of all of that is, it looks like it may be easier for regular dispensaries to open up in communities, especially bedroom communities. The state legislation also, at least in the first wave of licensing, is allocating 56 regular dispensary licenses to the Chicago, Naperville, and Elgin corridor. So, and we would be in that corridor. To be determined, to be discussed at a later date, but I just wanted to put this out there because it is a kind of a big deal. And it is something that it will impact all communities.
Thank
That's
you.
it.
Okay, thank you. I do want to thank you for all your work on the Tollway Intergovernmental Agreement. I know you've spent many weekends, many hours getting that, massaging that agreement so that the interests of the village are protected. So thank you for that. Thank you to staff too for all your work, and to Mr. Ziegler too. He weighed in on a lot of those engineering clauses, so it was definitely a group effort. Thank you very much. And with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I will second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ladies and gentlemen, we stand adjourned. Good evening.
So every one of these places.
2 hours
has
to the minute.
candle.
I know.
They're gonna
Exactly.
have the dispensary. What do you think?
Well, you guys
I mean,
are welcome to
you know,
come over if